Okay, hello everybody, and welcome to your recording on online workshop of open educational ideas and innovations. We had an online workshop on Monday, 24th of February, and the reason why you aren't viewing now the recording itself is that we had a kind of a human error and the recording wasn't on from the start of the session. So I will just give you a very brief heads up on what happened at the start of the session and just tell what happened until the recording is then on. So, in this project, Open Educational Ideas and Innovations, we are looking for new ways for educators and students to share information and educational ideas in principle. And this concept is very much connected to the open educational resources and open educational practices. So I would like to just very briefly tell you what these concepts are all about and how they relate to open educational ideas. In this workshop, we had all kinds of stakeholders participating. So we had people from higher education, like teachers, but also we had from the school domain, we had some principals, we had ICT developers, we had teachers, and also we had people from the industry participating. So we had quite a variety of different people coming together. And in this workshop, we were discussing how people would share their ideas and who would they share those ideas with and how would they go around it. What could facilitate this kind of idea sharing? But before we go to the recording, I would just like to introduce us. So my name is Henri Pirkkalainen. I'm a project researcher in Global Information Systems team in the University of Jyväskylä. And together I co-hosted this event with Professor Jan Pawlowski, who is leading this Global Information System group in the University of Jyväskylä, but is also working for the Ruhr-West University of Applied Sciences in Germany. So you will see us during the session, but also participants discussing and collaborating. But what are open educational resources? So mainly these are open resources in digital format that you can find freely online. In many cases, these are resources that are shared by teachers themselves or educational institutions. This concept has been there for maybe 10 years, and many institutions are actually now applying this open way of sharing so that all the materials that are created by the teachers within the institution are from the start with open. Very often these open educational resources are attached with something like a licensing scheme, like Creative Commons, this kind of CC logo that you very often see when browsing online. It tells you under which circumstances you can share this material or even adapt it for your own teaching. Open educational resources are very connected to something like open educational practices that are very often like just experiences shared between teachers online. But also where to find these resources. In this slide we have tried to just explain different types of portals that are there to share open educational resources. So there are various projects out there that enable kind of a sharing of these materials. Teachers might be able to upload their own materials here as well. And in very many cases, these are specified to a certain kind of a domain or topic. If you look at the ODS, Open Discovery Space portal, it's something that gives materials for the entire school curriculum. So in here you can find multilingual materials for all kinds of subjects in schools, in primary and secondary level. But very often it happens that these portals are for something in specific, like OSR for natural sciences, Open Scout for business and management in the higher education and in businesses, Discover the Cosmos for astronomy. But very often as well, there are portals that deliver materials for various types of topics and various contexts. In this session, the first thing that we had discussed with the participant was about have they used already OER for learning and teaching, and have they actually even participated in collaborative course development? So have they been somehow collaborating around OER and how they have done it? And in this session we had this kind of a tinyurl.com/OER2 online, where we had in Google Docs, we had some of these questions written down and that the participants can fill in their own perceptions there immediately. And actually, you can still access this document and you can put some your own elaboration there, because we want this to be very interactive and living document where people can report on how they share with each other and how they might do it in the future. In this project, Open Educational Ideas and Innovations, we are about to launch a portal later this spring where teachers and students can actually structure their idea sharing process, and we support it with very easy tools to use. But now, without further ado, let's move to the recording, and then you will see more what's happening in this workshop. So have fun and get to the online document and start sharing. Thank you.
In Finnish, depending on Finnish curriculum, and we also have English language web pages out of it. I just typed the site there, but the thing is that it's a 1 year's job to go through huge amount of material and then sort them out by subject and age groups depending the curriculum, and that's the biggest, I would say, problem what we have found with these open educational materials or resources, that there are huge amount of them, but nobody has sorted them out. So everybody is just giving out good materials, but the real people, so teachers, don't have time to go through them and think how they could implement those things into the daily curriculum. But there's also pages in English, so you can.
Thank you, Petri. Can you maybe share the link in that behind that tiny URL?
Yes, I can put it there. It's also in the chat already.
Point. Okay, very good. So let's maybe put this sorting of open educational resources as one of the discussion points later for this meeting, because it's a very good point that this type of it might be community oriented, that community has done some kind of a sorting and giving some recommendations that are very specific, but it can be also from some projects that they might have done some kind of a simple clustering and taking some bits and pieces that are usable in a particular context and giving those for teachers. But that's a very good point. So let's keep that in as one potential discussion point later for this session. But have any one of you else, maybe you can very briefly share your own experiences, and maybe you can say also if you have done something collaborative already for OER, maybe you can share those.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Hello? Okay, good. So this is Marisa Ponti from Gothenburg, and I don't have personal experience with use of OER in teaching and learning, but I just I studied how people used OER in some open courses, and what I noticed is exactly what Ture just said. So that well, people who participated in the courses that I observed were inundated with OER, because OER were the only resources they were expected to use, but there were too many. That was the problem. And I remember one of the participants that wrote a message to me saying that OER were just thrown to them, and they were expected to know what to do with them. But it's not always the case, especially when OER, a variety of OER is used in a course in a way that is not particularly organized by the facilitator, and that was the case in the course because participants were expected to be very independent. They were all adults and they were autonomous learners. So they were supposed to do they were supposed to do things on their own, but most of the time they just had a lot of OER that were very different from each other, from very different sources, using different languages, different approaches, and they were just confused. That's what I want to say.
Okay, thank you very much. I think this comment was very much in line with what Petri just said before, but that's a very good point. So there's just so many nowadays. I mean, if looking a couple of years back, the situation was very different. When we were building on the Open Scout project, one of the early discussions that we had with the business and management domain and the educators in higher education, they were very often saying that there's a kind of a lack of materials, lack of OER for them. I mean, that there's just nothing there right now. But the situation has changed quite dramatically. Also, when discussing with teachers in school education, it's nowadays very often that you hear that there's just too much to choose from. So it has been changing quite rapidly, that there's suddenly, I mean, many of these materials have been there already before, but nowadays they are much easier because there are open standards and ways to harvest the materials in one place where you can easily find them. But it has very soon now changed that having the access to the materials isn't really, maybe not enough. You need something more around it, some sorting, some pre-selection, or some more information that tells how to use that material in that context. So very good comment. Anything else? I see there's quite many already writing in the interactive document. That's very good.
Well, maybe one comment.
Any quick
Well, from my position, not as a presenter of OEI today, but in my personal experience, I have made a lot of experiences where we basically shared materials which were not intentionally open, and in the beginning they were not open. So the typical case of what we do in higher education, for example, is basically when we develop something new, a new course, we discuss with colleagues. And for example, we have invited colleagues for a summer school in Finland, and then at the spot we decided, okay, let's do the lecture together, and we put our materials together. So there was no open educational resource in the beginning, but then after a while we basically decided, okay, we put all our stuff together, bring that into a consistent lecture format, into a consistent didactical setting. So this was not the typical way of OER, but it was basically spontaneous within a group of colleagues. And I think that happens very often, that we shared stuff just with close colleagues and not necessarily in repositories on SlideShare or wherever. So just as a different position towards sharing between colleagues.
Very good point, Jan. Maybe I can say one comment, one personal observation that I made in the last year is that even though we often discuss under the concept of open educational resources, but the issues around this openness, they are already happening, and it might be that people are just using this terminology of open educational resources. Good example is that there are, for example, in Finland, there's a quite active group of teachers and educators in Facebook, that there's something like teachers that are interested in ICT. They are quite active in sharing what is going on, some very helpful materials, all kinds of best practices, experiences with each other, and people are very eager to learn. And often these kind of practices aren't really discussed under open education, but I think this is the kind of a central kind of a philosophy of open education, to go towards social media, be active, get new experiences, get new insights, but also share those. And I think it's many cases that things happen even though they might not be called as related to open educational resources. So anything else from you? Sorry, I don't want to take away the full screen mode because I'm I'm terrified that I will again lose the presentation. So I'm not seeing the chat myself right now. So maybe just keep me aware, just telling if there's something there that should be raised. But I think in terms of the session, we could proceed now.
Add something
And
for
feel free to write
the
your
discussion, because you just did raise something most important, because the thing is that we are now talking about two different things which are mixed everywhere. So we are talking about open resources and open educational resources, and that is, I think, the biggest problem in this area, because if you are talking about education, you have to have some kind of goals for learning and teaching. When you are talking about schools and institutes, they have learning goals, and with that, the open resources can't be used if they haven't got any didactical framework around them. And that's also one problem with the open educational resources, that we are mixing these two things. There are open resources which can be used in education but don't have this didactical framework, so the teachers don't know how they could use them to achieve their teaching goals.
Oh yes, that's a very good point. And if looking at many of the repositories, the kind of places for look for open educational resources that were in the previous slide, in many cases they kind of allow this way of sharing, that you can share anything that's related to something that might be relevant for education, but it might not have like some kind of a learning goals attached to it. So it's a very good point. But at the same time, many of these resources might be very helpful in a way. But I think it's a kind of a matter of presentation, but it's also about how people perceive those. I mean, it's a big problem if it confuses teachers. I mean, then
No,
it's really a
not
problem.
like that. It's
So,
more like
yeah.
lack of time, because if you get bunch of resources, there's a huge work to be done before it can be really used for teaching. So you can't just spread different materials and try to figure out how they will work, but you have to have the didactical framework for it, and you have to do the work. So the biggest problem is that how the teachers can change or replace these contents, open educational contents, to the, could say, traditional personal curriculums or daily works. And this development process takes time, money, and patience.
Oh yes. And if it's not allocated in persons on like time planning, then it might be very
Yes,
hard.
you have to be more
I mean, then it would be
could say, you know the saying that.
Can you hear me?
Oh yes. So
Yeah. So
yeah,
I
please
think
go
that
ahead.
what's most important is that the teacher would have some sort of personal motivation to do the work. So, for example, last week I was preparing a lesson. So I had a motivation that I need some stuff. I don't have very much time, but I need some things that I haven't prepared myself. So I tried to find some OER so search various places. I, for example, searched Open Scout, see what was there, but also with just Google and so on, to try find. So if I really need to get it ready, and I don't have anything, then that's the time when we get them. So the motivation has to come from within the teacher. If you can't really if they are not willing to actually improve their lessons or even make them, if they're just teaching the same course all over again, then we will not get them to use anything. But if they are motivated, like for example Jan is doing his new course for next year, then that's when you get the person to actually do something, to make improvements for the so maybe this could be something to focus on, to see, can we motivate people to get motivated, or what are the places in their timelines when they are actually motivated to make the course or make new materials or improve their materials.
That's a very good point, Kati, and that's actually the reason why we are here. So in this session, we are going to discuss about new ways for sharing ideas and building materials in an earlier phase, when you must start planning for your courses, for your lessons, how to get people active then, and in which ways they would collaborate then, and with whom. Those are some of the questions that we will discuss today. But let's go on, and we'll have some interaction points during this session for sure. So all of you can bring your own viewpoints to the discussion. But before opening up the link, I would like to just put the one writer, John Steinbeck's slogan here about ideas. Just ideas are like rabbits. You get a couple and learn how to handle them, and pretty soon you have a dozen. And this is something like guiding principles for the project that we have now, this Open Educational Ideas. And if you want to open that link already, it's idea-space.eu and the dash in between. And what the project is really about is to develop new ways for students and educators to share ideas. And if you open that link, I think it quite nicely summarizes what we're about. So that there are a lot of issues still about open educational resources. They might not have been adopted widely yet. There are quite not strong criticism, but ways for applying them. There are these issues what were raised in the discussion before. So something that they aren't previously sorted, they might not tell very clearly in which type of context they are used or how they should be used. There might be even too many to choose from, but also that they might not have this kind of a didactical framework around them. So it might not have clear learning goals attached. So there are many issues around OER, but in this project what we try to do is to find new ways for sharing educational resources and ideas before they are completed. Since what you see nowadays in those behind those OER portals that are linked before is that they deliver in many cases materials, resources that are complete. But is this the best practice to do? Is this the right way to go? So how easy it's to improve something that is already delivered and ready, and how easy it's also to adopt something that's ready for someone. But how do you perceive it yourself? So these are some of the questions that we have in this project and what we want to tackle. So what we want to do is to bring educators and students together to work with educational resource creation. We want them to incubate ideas, and we want to deliver somehow a very simple way for them to share these ideas, bring the communities together, and also promote openness. So we want to somehow build OER movement, better adopted. So if you look at the site, we are rather small consortium. We're about universities, networks, and research institutions from 8 countries. And all of us have been previously working together in various projects around OER. So we are very engaged and interested in building this forward. And as you see from the site, the interactive tool for sharing your ideas and building on them is not yet ready. So we are rather rather new project. We started in start of October, but we will deliver this first version of the interactive tool in start of May, and this is also when we want all of you to come there and build on educational ideas together. So, but keep an eye for that site, but let's go forward. So, when thinking about what is normally shared, in terms of open educational resources, it's very often something like learning materials, slide sets, simulations, animations. But in terms of open educational ideas, what is normally shared? I guess very often it's like conversations with your colleagues, close colleagues, maybe some other people from the same kind of a community and domain. It might be some informal messaging. But what else could be shared when you are discussing ideas and showing ideas to each other? This is one discussion point later on for this session, what we want to discuss, what we want to tackle and find out what would be shared when you are building on your ideas. When you have a new course that you're planning, let's say you're planning a course for social media in a higher education context, how would you share ideas? Where would you find those collaborators? How would you make it somehow very open from the start with? And what would you actually share? We wanted to also give a couple of other hints of what is normally shared, like because open educational resources is very closely related to open educational practices. So experiences, learning designs, curricula, lesson plans, and so on. These are very often shared as well in those portals that you can access through various places that were previously linked. But also open access, open source. These are related topics around openness that should not be forgotten in a way. But in this session, we'll focus on open educational ideas. And as previously discussed around OER, there are still a lot of things that can go wrong. And how to tackle these issues, how to make OER better adopted, this is something that guides our work. But in many cases, what still kind of fails with OER movement is that people have various challenges. They have the lack of time. It might be that something like their organization doesn't fully support them to build on OER. They might not be recognized in an organization. There might not be even clear policies or guidelines how to deal with them. There might not be any training available for it, because it needs time. And this kind of a open, like a sharing culture might not be there in their organization or even in the community. So various things might go wrong, but at the same time, we can pinpoint some of the key challenges. So OER reuse in specific, so that people would take materials that are out there, build it somehow for their own context, for their own courses. This is not really taking place, not in higher education, not in schools or enterprises. And even though these issues many of the projects have started tackling this issue, they try to address this reuse aspect, but it just doesn't take off yet. What is the reason? One thing could be that there's just a kind of a lack of recognition in the community, but we really argue that one thing is that this kind of a not invented here syndrome. So people tend to use what they have built themselves and trust on what they have built themselves. So if it's not created by themselves, and if they don't have the time enough for reviewing it, finding out if it's relevant, it might be that they just feel that it cannot be good enough. And in many cases in OER, there might not be very good explanations on how you would use that material to deliver your teaching. So, and as one teacher has once said, I look at the resources at OER and then I build it myself. So I think this is something that might happen, and it's not really kind of the way to go, to spend time for looking at what there is and then being kind of unsure if you are allowed to use that material or how you would use it, that you just start creating it yourself. So what we argue is that sharing complete resources might not be the best solution. might not be the way to go for OER. It might be that we have to start looking at earlier on in the collaboration, try to find people, like-minded people for creating these materials in a collaborative manner. And that's something that we want to discuss with you. And one thing that we are building on, there's a nice picture of Jan and his daughter Maya, as you can see, holding an OER. It's a teddy bear. but anyways, I think this represents quite nicely some things that are kind of recognized already in the literature. So some things, some principles that people kind of some context, some kind of issues and happenings where people feel that the knowledge that they create somehow belongs to them. So there's many things discussed in, for example, by Trevi Ranus in 2011 about this wabi-sabi principles, about kind of a Japanese world view about that nothing is finished, nothing is perfect, and designing the imperfect allows creative and creation processes. So one thing that should be discussed is that how can you improve something that is perfect, and how do you contribute to something that is already perfect? So what we want to tackle in this project is kind of something, this imperfect thinking, imperfect design. And main idea is to share in early stages. So when you are developing your own courses, you are developing your ideas towards some educational practice. It might be some activity around teaching. It might be that you are having a course and you are looking for other people to hold it together, so collaborative teaching. It might be that you are co-supervising a topic, subject. It might be mainly anything, but how to get people active in sharing these ideas in an early way and developing kind of adaptable ways for OER. So this is what we want to tackle. And kind of a summary before we show you one kind of a showcase how to build on course development in a very open manner, is that reuse of OER is still generally very low, and one of the things is that people don't really feel that the materials that they create, they don't feel any kind of attachment to those. And what we want to pursue in this project is to try to see if when people are developing on artifacts and collaboration together, is how to get them also to feel some kind of that they feel really benefits for this collaboration, for developing these materials. And so linking to this emotional ownership, this is what we want to find out. And naturally, it's much easier to create a community of practice around an idea than a resource, since creating a resource in collaborative manner, this really hasn't been taking place at the moment. But the communities are very active already in social networks and in closed communities as well. So how to facilitate that, how to make the best use of those communities that already discuss with each other, share practices. Because just to summarize this, traditionally, when discussing about open educational resources, there have been various kinds of life cycles that explain how OER is searched for, maybe adapted for your own needs, and then you're running a course, you create some kind of practices around it, you share those with the community, other like-minded teachers find those resources and reuse them. This is kind of the best practice process around OER that very rarely takes place. And how we want to adapt this is to think about the open educational ideas life cycle and tie this to open educational resources, is to sharing ideas, finding collaborators, finding communities that are like-minded, getting those people who already somehow collaborate together and getting their ideas, enriching those with yours, and also build OER in a collaborative manner, and then run those courses, share the practices. But start from the ideas, start very early on. And what you might share as an idea, it might be some kind of a mock-up, it might be some kind of a concept map. I think this really depends on a person, your own personality, and how you structure your thinking. But how I start building on any ideas myself, if I have some idea about lecture that I want to keep, it might be for me that I just open my spreadsheet and I just put some like bullet points, things that I find important. But for some other person, it might be mind map. So, but also for some others, it might be some kind of sketches. It also might be some outlines, simple outlines that you have structured, or it might be even some kind of prototypes if you're thinking on more design-oriented thinking. So, but what people are sharing and how they share their ideas, this really depends on the person. But we also want to try to find out what could be the most usual ways for sharing ideas, and how could we also take those practices and put it to some kind of an interactive tool where the users could really build on their ideas, build on their collaborations. But we want to discuss with you one kind of practical case, and Jan, maybe you can introduce what you have been doing in the last few weeks and how this relates to open educational ideas.
Okay, so thanks, Henry, for the introduction. I would just like to introduce a kind of small self-experiment which I'm running at the moment. Well, as I introduced before, I'm currently changing positions from Finland to Germany, and part of that is, like probably all of us have experienced, I got to develop new lectures, there are new learning materials to be developed, and basically I wanted to try out, okay, can I actually do that in a very open and very transparent way? And well, it's just in the very beginning, and I thought I'd share a couple of experiences with you. Henry, could you move to the next slide, please? So basically, what I'm doing is I'm developing a course on a information systems topic on IT service management, which is not a very, let's say, rocket science type of course. It's pretty much standard. So I'm basically interested in, of course, trying to find new ideas, how to teach this topic, and how to develop collaboratively. Well, the project Open Educational Ideas is not yet that far that we have sophisticated tools. So in the beginning, I started thinking, okay, how can I actually share my different stages, and what would be the appropriate tools to do so. I was thinking just in a very simple way, okay, the first stage is I have an idea, or I have a requirement. I need to develop a course on this topic of IT service management. So how do I communicate it, and how do I find people who might be interested, or who might actually support me, or people who would make use of a potential OER at a later stage? So this is the initial idea posting. I have a requirement, I need to teach a course, and I let my colleagues know. Then, of course, the process continues a little bit, and of course I have a certain outline of the topic in mind. So what is the general didactic setting which I would like to have? So this is at a university. Students are in the 4th semester, so second year, young people, and I need to get them active in the topic, more or less. So I start an outline. I have a kind of structure in mind, but this might not yet be very far developed. So it's probably on a kind of topic level. So what are the key topics which I would like to have? And then the material and slides are developed in a hopefully a collaborative way. And well, I would just like to share a few experiences with the very simple tools which I used. Basically what I did, could you move to the next slide, Henry? I basically tried to describe the idea as good as possible. So basically I wrote, okay, I need to develop this course, this is the target group, this is the setting, and I'm interested in collaborating. That was the initial idea description, so describing the topic, describing the target group, describing the very rough learning outcomes and objectives. And what I basically did, I made an open Google document and I basically shared this via my Facebook group. So some of you might have seen this in my messages in Facebook, and on the other hand, I tweeted it. So the initial reaction was quite interesting, actually. So I got
Can you still hear me? I think Jan disappeared somehow. Okay, let's see if we get him still back in. So
The slides have disappeared as well.
yeah, because I can't see the slides and the Adobe Connect at the same time, so I'm using my PC with one monitor, so that's the reason. So let's see if we get Jan back in.
Now are you back?
Okay, Jan, are you back in?
okay. I'm back in. I just had the connection lost for some reason. I don't know why. I can't see the screen yet, but I hope you can hear me again.
Yeah, we can hear you. It's just now getting the screen back.
Yeah, my apologies for the quite poor connection which I'm having at the moment. So anyway, the initial stage was actually quite surprising. So let's say I got about half of the comments and expression of interests from colleagues who I knew, colleagues mainly in the field of open education, colleagues who were basically interested, okay, what are you doing there? What is this kind of course development all about? And I got comments from colleagues who are in the field and who basically have an interest in the topic of IT service management. So quite a few very interesting, let's say, expression of interests. And then the other half of the comments were basically just people who got interested just through the hashtag on Twitter. So mainly people in the field of IT service management who just saw what have I actually, that there is something happening. Then the second stage came, basically trying to outline the course in more detail. Oh, by the way, what I didn't mention is that I do this course in German, but I basically did the initial stages in German and English, so that I could actually share this stuff with a larger target group, and that I get more feedback from colleagues also on the international level. So basically, then the second step followed. where I tried to outline a bit deeper what are the contents, what are proposed learning methods, and this is like on a level of detail, looking at a 2-hour lecture, as this is the time slot, and trying to also provide some input, what kind of discussions will happen, what kind of exercises are going to happen, and last but not least, what are potential reference materials. So from my point of view, this could be OER, which I found. This could be articles which I'm using in the class for preparation, but this is also where I'm very interested in getting input from colleagues who say, okay, well, I have done this lecture, look at my slide sets, I have done the same, you could see a couple of videos here on YouTube. So basically this is the initial collection of possible materials, and what I'm trying to do here is collect interesting materials, get people involved in the development process, but also addressing this filtering problem, which was mentioned before. I mean, if you look for IT service management or ITIL, this framework, you'll get thousands of matches in Google, you get hundreds of matches in repositories. So by inviting colleagues and friends and also the open public to comment here, I basically have a kind of human filter, people helping what could be useful and could be helpful for the further development. So again, this document is also completely open. So people have commented in the Google Doc, for example, but I've also received feedback through Twitter, for example, and also through personal emails and personal communication. But I was very surprised that actually even opening up your own development process already provides quite a lot of comments. So I really got some very, very good ideas. I got interesting input, and specifically I got very nice input materials, mainly from colleagues and friends. So the initial results, and this is just a 2 weeks exercise now, is basically that I got 2 commitments from colleagues who said, yes, we will contribute. You can use, for example, our materials, and we will work with you towards a common collaborative open educational resources. Well, the types of comments I basically got were already very specific. Like people were mentioning, oh, this topic is missing. Why don't you focus more on this topic? So quite interesting ideas. Also regarding, and I think this was one of the main benefit at this stage for me. I got quite interesting ideas on learning methods, how to activate the students, even though it's quite a, well, I'm not saying a boring topic, but a topic which does not excite people naturally. So I got very interesting ideas regarding didactics. So on the other hand, of course, I saw, well, I haven't had problems. I opened up the documents, but for example, I'm still not experiencing any spam problems. So I have not yet comments on the great sunglasses you could buy, which are very useful for a course or something like that. So, well, I have avoided this so far, but this would come, of course, as the documents are open. The documents are shared in Twitter. So basically, it was already quite a useful exercise. What was hard for me, as I used this open Google Doc, I communicated through Twitter and Facebook. The comments are totally distributed. So basically, every day I have to compile the comments. Some people have commented in the Google Doc, some wrote replies on Twitter. So that makes it a little bit hard when you don't have a consistent development environment. So there should be a place where all the comments are. And of course, I also need to find ways to tell people how far how am I progressing, so that not everybody has to look at the documents all the time. Another thing which I saw from my personal experience, and this will also lead towards the next discussions, text documents are not very intuitive in many cases. So I think I managed to describe the idea quite well, I hope. At least I didn't get any negative feedback. But you don't see, like, on one view, on one glimpse, what this is all about. So visualization tools are certainly something which need to be used in such a collaborative development plan. And again, this whole workflow, it's in an experimental stage. So I'm using just simple stuff which is available for everyone, like Google Docs, but there is not yet a workflow. So I cannot really in many cases, from one stage to the next, I have to copy and paste a lot of things. I have to add stuff manually to documents. So this is one of the experience I made. There should be a kind of consistent workflow at a point of time. Anyway, overall, it was really a very nice, or it is actually a very nice experience to get a lot of very committed, very involved people who have a very strong opinion on the topic, and I'm getting their feedback. And this has helped me in the initial stages very, very much. So I think it's been a useful exercise, and you are still free to join me. So if you have an interest in seeing how this experiment goes, what kind of comments are there, I'm sharing this also in the blog on the idea-space website. So please feel free to comment as well, to make suggestions. How could I describe things better? What are good ideas for such a course? I'm extremely interested in that. By this, I would like to conclude this mini experience report. It's ongoing work, but it's extremely promising. So I hope that I get some more comments, and I'll move back to Henry now for the further workshop discussions.
Okay, thank you, Jan. So yeah, what you saw here, like in this showcase of Jan, we tried to sum up it's somehow to several stages of idea generation. So how we thought that one could structure their kind of idea generation that goes towards course development would be something that a person might have some kind of a decisions to launch a course. They somehow generate the objectives and the key message they want to deliver to maybe their colleagues, to the community. They somehow collaborate the outline. They iterate the development. It's all the time there's a peer evaluation taking place, and later on improvement by users. Before we go to those stages in specific, I would like to just remind that all of the materials that you see here during the session, we will still share afterwards. So I think I got all of your email addresses you wrote me, but if you didn't, if you could still put me a message that we will put you all kinds of the links to the recordings, to these slide sets, to the interactive documents and so on. So if you haven't sent me a message before, you can do it now, but if you already did, I have your contact. You will get all of this later on. But yeah, let's go on. Before we want to discuss with you like this idea generation, what we thought is that one could structure kind of this development process that Jan was talking about into multiple steps. But it's some of the big questions that we have in the project, and why we want to discuss with all of these issues with you is that we want to get a very good grasp of how one could build this kind of idea generation. What tools to use in such steps, how to get collaborators active, where would the collaborators be, how would you get to them, and these are really what we want to find out for us also to, like on the one hand, to build this kind of an interactive tool, but also to get the OER movement more collaborative and using ICT and social media in a more open way. Jan, can you also accept those guests that are coming in? I still don't have the view. I only have the presentation here. So, but some things that we have in mind right now is that when looking at Jan's example, how people are building on courses, it might be that they like approach it in a different way, but somehow how to communicate, how to mediate the communication, what type of artifacts could be created and shared, and what tools to use. These are some of the things that we have in mind, and maybe we can get your ideas here as well. But if we think about idea generation in stages, like what Jan was explaining is that firstly, you would somehow have the decisions to launch the course. You have some kind of a need for your own, like your work. So in Jan's case, it was the IT service management course that need to be developed. But somehow you would have to discuss it with people, with the community, if you do it in an open way. And it might be that you reach out to your colleagues, but also like reach out to the community outside. But how do you do it, and what do you share? In terms of what Jan had was just this kind of a very initial kind of a sketch, but also like informal messaging in Facebook, Twitter, but also through email and so on. And what could be shared is something like a very small glimpse, some idea description. And when you would somehow generate the message, you would of course try to find partners. You would reach out to the community, and maybe it would be through social networks. So this was what Jan did as well, through Facebook and Twitter, but also through Google Docs and email. Then in the outline process that Jan explained, this was done in the Google document, but also how you would facilitate that and what you do there. You would somehow try to create a detailed plan toward a course on IT service management. And it might be that you would discuss the outlines with colleagues, but also provide it to other stakeholders, industry students, try to get their feedback. You would mediate it by discussions in meetings, but also in asynchronous feedback that takes place through ICT. And it would be colleagues and with broader communities. And in this kind of this type of process, it might be that you would use some kind of video conferencing tools, interactive workshops as we have right here for Jan to get the feedback, but also like social networks and simple commenting. And what was done then is that you would somehow go towards an iterative development of the course itself and the learning resources, the open educational resources. And you would somehow do it in a collaborative manner. But as Jan said, like in many cases, if he's creating this in German, so this multilinguality is something that really needs to be somehow discussed and managed. So how do you do it? Because it might be that the communities that are of interest to you, they might be, you don't share the same mother tongue as them. So you might handle the collaboration in English, but still the materials that are necessary for you, they might be in German or Finnish or something like this. So how to handle the multilinguality and what kind of tools could somehow support that kind of a collaborative authoring in multilingual mode. Yeah, the communication would be just collaborative co-creation, discussing initial result. It would be kind of mediated by collaborative editing, consecutive editing, and so on. The communities would be again the author plus the interested communities around that. And multiple types of course instances, open educational resources would be generated. But what is very important is this kind of a peer evaluation and somehow further improvement. And this is something that often lacks in open educational resources movement, is that how to get people easily evaluating your materials, but also clearly knowing what kind of purpose the material serves. as earlier Petri said there, that in many cases the materials, it's not very clear what's the didactical framework around it, what are the learning goals. So in this kind of a collaborative development that Jan explained, the kind of a communities and these collaborators are all the time somehow part of the process, and they see the bigger picture. So it's very different from when you would go to some existing repository, look for open educational resources there, because they are complete. It might be that you see only a slide set and a couple of like metadata around it. So something like who was the author, when was it created, and maybe something like of the language, or what kind of is it for schools or for higher education, but it might not tell too much outside that. So in peer evaluation, you would of course try to somehow verify the quality of what you have produced, and this might be done, and how Jan most likely will do it later on is to do similarly, just ask the colleagues to do it, but also like in an open manner, the community, might be the industry or students even. But how to do it? It might be somehow mediated by some kind of a feedback tool, but as this, what we are trying to develop later on in this project, in this open educational ideas and innovations project, is some kind of interactive tool where they could facilitate the entire procedure, this entire process that you see here. But as it doesn't exist right now, how you would do it with existing tools, and how to facilitate the kind of all comments in various places, try to aggregate them, and also make sure that your collaborators have the latest information as well. It might be tricky. And naturally, the last step would somehow, if you have some kind of course developed OER in a collaborative manner, you would of course try to give it for the community, for further users to improve and to adapt it. So it might be that you would somehow like request feedback in social networks, announce the new course there. You might publish it in multiple repositories, request feedback also attached to those in those repositories and outside, ask from the students and other types of communities involved. You might create some kind of good practices around side, and you might use various tools for this stage as well. So what we want to discuss with you, and what we want you to reflect for a minute maybe here, and maybe some of you already did, in the interactive tool, in the interactive Google document, we already put like many of these questions down there. So if you have now already some kind of a mindset of who you would share with, how you would somehow structure your idea sharing, where would you share, which tools to use, how to get people feeling this kind of ownership for the artifacts that they share, and somehow seeing the benefits of the collaboration, how you would come across it. Would it work in your own institution, with your own colleagues, with the community that you work in, with maybe in the region where you work in, or maybe even in the country where you work in? Do these situations somehow support this kind of idea sharing that Jan was also telling about? So maybe reflect for half a minute on this, and let's then jump on some of these discussion points. But feel free also to open up the Google document, which will, just to remind, it's this tinyurl.com/OEI2online. So you can open this already, and you can write your own comments, but the better even is that we discuss these here together. So, but reflecting, what does it take for someone to feel ownership for artifacts that they create? If it's teaching materials, essay, ideas, and so on. This might be quite a tricky question. So we might start from something like, in which situations would you consider sharing your ideas, with whom and how? So when somebody feels that they already have their opinion somehow, or any of these, maybe starting from the who you would share it, and in which kind of a situation you would share some educational idea, what would be, feel free to join the discussion. But you can also take 30 seconds or something still to think about this. Okay, another 30 seconds. I'll go and grab just a bit of water and then I'll be back. Okay, let's start the discussion part for this session. Naturally, there were very good points in the previous discussion that we had about the some of the problems around OER. But before maybe going to those, let's focus on where would you share your ideas, who you would share those with, and in which kind of situation would you share those. So if anyone has anything, you can start from any of those bullet points, but maybe one thing to consider in the start is what kind of in what kind of a context you live in. So if it's higher education or school context or something, it might be very different. And as we have many people here from industry, from schools, training developers, and also like teachers in higher education, it might be that we all have very, very different perception on what kind of information would be shared, and if you would even share your ideas with others. So yeah, go ahead. Stage is all yours.
Well, there is already quite a bit of discussion going on in the Google Doc. Well, not a spoken discussion, but a kind of writing discussion. Maybe we can take up some of the points which are currently raised in the Google Doc as well as in the chat. So please share your thoughts with us.
Very good.
Well, I can start by saying something. So I think that the easiest way for me to share is through the channels that I use in any ways in my normal communication. So I work in university. So the first thing, if I want to share something, I will share with my coffee room. And not online, just in the coffee room. But then the next step would be that I write a personal blog and I share there. That's very useful for me. I get a lot of feedback through back channels, and I also distribute the blog in Facebook, which then creates more discussion around. So these are tools that I use anyways in my normal life for anything, not just for work related purposes, but for any problems or anything. But they might not be like Jan was saying that there's a lot of people who like to answer in Twitter, or a lot of people who like to comment on Google Doc or something like that. People have so different ways of the various tools that they like to use. What is the most convenient way for them? I don't know. Maybe we have to provide quite a lot of options in order to get the most amount of idea sharing going on. But then the question really becomes on how do you manage the whole concept? What is like the place where everything is put together? And if this moderating business is something that the teacher still have to do, for all the comments that come to various places, then it's just something extra to do, and it's certainly something that the teacher doesn't want to do. So I think that's a
very good.
big sharing barrier, the managing the comments. Yeah.
It is, but the first thing that you said, I think that's very good. So that like where you would share is something that you would share anyways. I mean, something natural. So maybe starting in a coffee break discussion and using kind of at the channels that you already use, and not maybe learning something new for it. So it would be your own blog or something like this. So I think that's a very good point. I think you were going through many of the discussion points there, and pointing out some of the challenges already. Is there anyone else who somehow wants to jump on what Kati just said?
I would like to ask a question to Jan, and I'm interested in knowing more about how the initial idea, when everything starts, should be. I mean, how this idea should look like. Let's say, if I can make myself clear, can you start with a very, very embryonic, very simple idea? Because what I saw in your slide here, it seems to me that you had already, anyway, it was at the initial stage, but you had an objective, so you knew what you were aiming for. But now let's take a situation where you don't have a very clear ideas about what your objective could be, or you know that you want to do something, but you don't know how to do it, and you are very confused. How can you start a process like that?
Well, that's the typical "it depends" answer. But let me give you another example. Well, usually when developing courses, I have a quite clear impression, and I have a quite clear opinion what I need to tell people. So I need to tell people about the target group. I need to tell people about the study situation and about some general outline. So that's pretty clear for me. Another situation I have that's not part of the project here. 2 years ago, I got quite excited actually about the political development in Myanmar, and basically my idea was to say, okay, we have so many open educational resources. Couldn't that be a great base for a common project in Myanmar, for example, regarding vocational training there, to support state building in a way, to support just people getting up to speed in their new democracy in a way. So that's a typical, totally different type of idea. Let's do something in some country, you know. And basically, this is also then at this stage, I just discussed with a couple of colleagues who I knew they would understand what I mean, but I wouldn't share it with a broad. So I would just describe and say, okay, we've been working on OER so long. Why don't we try something new in a new country which has a lot of training needs at the moment? Do you have any ideas? Do you know any initiatives? So it's a very fuzzy idea, saying let's do something there. But then the ideas develop as well. I mean, that's what happens in every coffee break at a good conference. So, but it's hard to formalize it in a way.
Okay, let's open the interactive document here. Yeah, that's a very good point. So how to somehow start it, how to formulate an idea. That's a very good point. I think what I'm quite keen on finding out, because we have quite many participants from various backgrounds, is that do you see that there's a difference in, like, if we look at like school context or higher education, is that, do you think that people in the higher education context are maybe not so keen on sharing their ideas as they are in the school domain? Do you think, like, in terms of educators in higher education or teacher in schools, they would be both as open towards sharing ideas with others? Does anyone have a, like, a personal opinion, or maybe some kind of a, any, maybe from your background or something like a personal experience? Have you witnessed anything that could tell of something like this? Or do you think that it doesn't matter what the context is, that people would be open for sharing their ideas? Any comments?
I would comment on that because I have experience in various backgrounds, and I would say that it's not a problem of people. It's more like the teaching and learning culture. The biggest problem is that every teacher is teaching like they have learned, and they want to secure their teaching methods very well. So the sharing, on the other hand, I haven't never met any teacher who would have been using somebody else's teaching materials, because everybody has their personal teaching methods and the way and culture. So the problem is more like I said before, the didactical structure where these things can be implemented. So we only can give teachers some examples and advice. So tell stories how these different content has been used in different teaching situations. And that's the hard part, because everything ought to be then translated and localized between different countries and languages. On the other hand, we can easily framework core content which can be found from different cultures and different curriculums. So I am fully behind this idea that sharing these ideas, but the ideas ought to be more like stories of practice, how these things can have been used. And on the other hand, as I said before, some kind of sorting ought to be done for the teachers, even if they are from primary school up to the university, what content is available for different topics of teaching and learning, and if they are then supported with real stories how the colleagues have been used them, then we are on the right track.
May I?
Yeah.
May I follow
Yeah,
up
go
on
ahead.
that? I think if we step back a lot of steps, I mean, to look upon it from a kind of elevator perspective, I think this is very much about our concept of learning and being professional. And I like very much the concept of a digital scholar. I mean, these days you need to be a digital scholar. This is the way you kind of carry out your profession, and sharing and interaction is very much part of that. I mean, it rings a bell when it comes to learning theories and whatever we believe in. But I think these concepts needs to be kind of detailed and described and put up as an ideal, because at the end of the day, you can't survive as a professional being a teacher or a researcher or being in education in all parts of education without being part of a community that's sharing ideas.
Good, Ture. Is there something? Maybe I can go back to Petri's comment. I totally like. I'm all for this comment that you gave, Ture, about digital scholars. That sharing is really a part of it, and this is what should be kind of embraced. But at the same time, I would really like to know, like Petri, what you were saying is that like teachers' practices. So how do they share ideas right now? If they are building their own lessons, do they actually discuss with each other, or do they work kind of alone? So I know that you have a lot of background and you know like many of the teachers firsthand. So I would really like to know what is taking place currently. Do they share information with others? I mean, when they are building their own lessons, do they look for ideas from other colleagues how they would do it, or is it that they more just approach it themselves? This is what I would really like to know. And we have lots of teachers here, so maybe if you have anything like, do you do it alone, like right now, or what kind of information do you actually like try to find out from your colleagues, or what would you share with your colleagues? This is something really interesting.
I could comment on that. That's the main question, because now we ought to move to the social age, and the basics of social age working skills is team working, which is not very common in educational institutes. So in my experience, more than 95% of teachers are lonely riders who want to do their best by the skills they have and by the training. And that's something also is could say that teachers have quite weak self-esteem, so they also like to keep their candle under the box, because they are very afraid of comments and evaluation coming from the colleagues. So this is something which ought to be changed, and that's why I try to train the teachers that more they tell about their experiences, like the mistake is a gift purposes. So if you have bad experiences, it's more valuable to share than the, could say, the success stories. So this is something which also need to be taken in count when we are building these platforms and sharing areas, that they are not only the, could say, success stories which tells things that normally teachers can't work with in the school.
But as you were saying, that if 95% of teachers are still this kind of lonely riders, do you think this is something that is specific for like Finland, or is this universal in a way? So maybe are there others also here that, do you see it in the same way that teachers do like approach it themselves in the best manner that they can, but they are still, most of the teachers are still lonely riders, while this kind of a team working is something that should be strived towards, but might not take place too much right now? Are teachers lonely riders, no matter what the context and country is? Is it like a universal thing?
Well, I don't have a direct experience with teachers, and I don't teach myself, but when I go back to my country in Italy, and I have several friends who are teachers, and none of them is involved in collaborative development of courses. So they're not even supported to do that, and not even within schools, not to mention opening up a collaborative development the way Ian did, because it takes some time anyway. So you need just the idea of compiling manually all the different responses, all the different comments and thoughts that you get over the different platforms and different social media. It takes some time. People are not rewarded and acknowledged for doing things like that. And so I know just one person who really bothered to write a book about teaching English as a second language. And she did it on her own together with another person. They did it because they were interested in doing that, but it's really an isolated case. But this is just my anecdotal experiences. So I'm not saying that I want to generalize, but I think that there are national situations and cultures within schools that in some countries where really teachers are not supported, not motivated to engage in this kind of process within and outside school.
Yeah, it's a very good point that the being a lonely rider is often because of like some constraints or not being necessarily supported in the institution, or just like that do not see the motivation for doing so. So it might be that cannot see the benefits, or maybe it's just like seems too far-fetched to start some kind of idea sharing because don't see something immediate coming towards you. But what you were just saying, like about this collecting all of these things manually, naturally what we want to get out of this session is clear requirements for us. I mean, we are here for Open Educational Ideas project, and what we want to do is somehow facilitate this idea sharing process and to provide such an interactive tool that is very simple to gather these to categorize your collaboration. I mean, to structure your collaboration, get the all the discussion that is going around wherever it's going. I mean, it might be in Google Docs, it might be in Twitter, Facebook, that you can nicely summarize it and gather it in one place and manage that collaboration. So that's naturally what we try to do, but this tool is not yet there. So we want to first understand what kind of constraints, how do people actually share, in which situations do they share, and this is why we really are looking forward for your comments here.
Right.
So is there anything else about the I think that was very interesting to hear about the teachers' practices. We have people from higher education as well. Do you see it in the same way? Is it that the also educators, no matter what your topic is in university or applied sciences, that teachers are still kind of a lone rangers or lonely riders, doing things alone mostly? Yeah, are there any comments for this? I have some personal experiences or maybe some opinions about this, but I would really like to hear from you.
Well, there was Sigurberg's comment on 5 to 20% of educators that are ready to open up, and I would fully agree on that in higher education, especially also taking Tura's comment on the digital scholar into account. People are not yet ready. So I would say, from my personal experience, people are very willing if they are asked personally. So in many cases, you could reuse that when you just ask nicely. On the other hand, sharing completely, I would say that's on the lower border of Sigurberg's estimation, so maybe 5% in higher education. For the reasons are probably the same, like with teachers in schools. People are afraid of being embarrassed or embarrassing by providing bad materials, or even, I think in many cases, people just copy and paste rather carelessly. um, like copying without any IPR knowledge and so on. So I think but I think this whole aspect of personal relations, this seems really to help, and for me this is quite valuable, even though it takes quite a bit of effort to communicate the ideas. Um, when you ask people nicely, you get something back. It's as easy as that.
That's very true. I think this is something that relates to many of the things that happen right now in social media and online communities, is that the differentiation of something being quite personal or related to some, like a group of interest or some kind of a more open community. Because in many cases, like what open educational resource providers and these portals are all about is something like a very, very open, like platforms for community, and it somehow so easily gets that you don't see any face there. I mean, you don't see the person anymore behind it, and you somehow sometimes might get a bit emotionally like detached from it, compared to situation when your colleague comes to you and asks that, okay, I have this problem, or I have this new idea that do you have a minute to just comment on this? It's very different from when you see in some open community, some like open call for something, because it might be that you don't necessarily know the person, or it might be that you at that moment just don't have just enough of time to do that. But when it's personal, it might be also a very good starting point. So I agree with that. Is there anything else there that you would like to raise for the topics that we now gone through? I think it was very interesting about the teachers in higher education.
Sorry.
Sorry, is there somebody? Okay, so it was just wasn't a comment. So do you think something that I would like to still ask about this practices is like, does any one of you think that like people are now getting more active in social media, in ICT usage? So that, do you think that there's now some kind of a new generation really evolving? And how do you think that that affects this kind of idea sharing? We kind of went through this digital scholars and this kind of issues, but do you think that there's some kind of a new generation evolving in teachers as well? And do you think that there will be something towards openness or sharing ideas in general? Do you have any opinions on this?
I have been following the Finnish system now several years, tens of years, but now in couple of years, 2 years back or something like that, we have started quite many, for example, Facebook groups in different specific topics, like kindergarten teachers, or like in our project we have a Facebook site of games in education, and people are now rushing to these platforms for sharing ideas and experiences. So the wave is on. The thing is that what is there for sharing is quite small. So there might be a possibility also to share these open educational things when they have been structured enough for the small people, for those teachers who are first timers in this area. And that's my key idea is that we need to create is with the weakest link. So the basics ought to be as simple as it was said in earlier states, that there ought to be very simple things what teachers can just take and put their daily curriculum just tomorrow for testing, does it work or not?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very good point. Any other comments for this?
Well, one thing or one question you mentioned just Facebook, and I have the feeling that ideas are shared very freely in social networking platforms, especially in the younger generation. But we don't seem to have this free exchange of experiences in the educational environment yet. So either, only if there is something like a Facebook group. So it seems to provide a kind of atmosphere which is very open for sharing, but it doesn't work for education yet. I haven't really seen a good, let's say, a good social educational network or so. So does this mean we should use Facebook or these networks to make sharing possible or to make idea sharing possible? Or what would be the solution in terms of social networking? So I'm not sure about that yet.
Okay, I answer you that I've been following, for example, tablets in education in Finnish, which now has something like 10 or 12,000 members in the group, and there people are sharing their not so many experiences, but they are asking questions how to solve different kind of problems. And it also happens in this our Facebook group is that it's more asking questions, where to find what, how did you solve these problems, does anybody have experience about things, and that's how it's working. So it's more like finding out the weaknesses from the system, not the best practices.
Yeah, that's what I've also noticed when looking at. Oh, there's somebody might want to take the phone. Yeah. So seeing what happens in social networks right now, and what teachers seem to be asking for is that they have some simple particular problem that relates to their work, and that's somehow also what often gets some rich discussion around that. So, but how to somehow make it, I mean, now I'm thinking from the open educational ideas perspective, is that how can we really try to find out what the current problems that the teachers have, and somehow try to turn that to some kind of a collaborative movement where ideas would be shared. It might be that because those questions that are shared there's and maybe some ideas as responses, they so easily get lost in some matter of couple of minute discussion there on Facebook, but how to make those somehow more prominent, and that people could somehow look for some good solutions for a particular problem. So I think that might be also interesting to really discuss. But yeah, there seem to be quite many things written down there. Is somebody, maybe you want to comment just briefly what you have written there, if we haven't touched upon that issue in our discussion already. So seems that there are so many interesting things going in the document right now already. Jan, have you spotted something that we haven't really jumped into right now?
Well, I guess I've spotted a lot of things, and it's I mean, this document we see on Google Doc, it is already actually a nice idea sharing process in a way. Actually, I think we should see how do we follow up on this session, because we're getting very close to an end, and maybe we have one final round of comments, and we then should also process a little kind of report and some action suggestions, because there are just so many good ideas. There are very good ideas on tools. There are there are many questions also raised with that. So for example, there are suggestions regarding tools, but there is still the issue how to integrate all these. How can we integrate like the personal working environments people are used to with such a process of idea sharing? There is of course still the question of culture. How can we create this open culture and improve this? So there are many strands, and we should now just think, okay, how can we follow up on this, and how can we continue on facilitating the discussion, and how can we actually come to further idea exchange on the open educational ideas? So I think we should just, for the last couple of minutes, think about some follow-up actions.
Oh yeah, I totally accept this proposal, Jan. I think it sounds very good. So how to build on collaborations, but also like to see some kind of a follow-up for this. As a kind of a wrapping up, are there any comments so far that maybe we haven't really touched upon, or something that really is now in your mind for sharing ideas in general online, but maybe also on the technical side of it? Is there something that really is in your mind before we go now to the wrapping up? Okay, if not, sorry, I still don't see the chat at the same time, since it's in the screen sharing mode, but I still see people writing there. But I think one thing that we could do from the project perspective, so we in Open Educational Ideas and Innovations project somehow really want to support, like now, this idea sharing process of educators and students as well. And since we don't have yet this interactive tool in place, and because you have already given quite a lot of very, very detailed and good feedback for us, we want to somehow keep on building this. And if you have anything, we might even want to see if there are some outcoming from the questions and the comments there. We might want to see if there are some activities that we could build around, but it might need some kind of a more discussion. So what we would like, at least firstly, like suggest what we could do is that we have an OEI Facebook group already generated. Let's see if I can share the link in the below in the. I'll put it to the start of the interactive document. Facebook groups link for it. I think you should be able to see it now on top. And what we would suggest to do is that you could submit your kind of ideas, questions, concerns at this moment to this this Facebook group, and we can take on the discussions there. But also what we can do from the project perspective is that we can support you finding, if you have some educational idea, let's say that you want to develop some course, or you might want to build on your idea towards some new learning activity or something your institutional like related, that the project really can support you in finding collaborators and build on your idea. So since we don't have this interactive tool yet there in place, we can offer to do this through the Facebook group, and naturally you can put those any of the ideas, comments there here in this document. Jan, have you maybe gone through any of the feedback? Is there something else as a kind of a follow-up that we could maybe build upon here from on the spot, or does this require a bit of more elaboration?
Well, I think there are many interesting questions raised, and I think I don't know if you have all the email addresses. So I would like to continue with this discussion. So one possibility is that we just try to raise some of the issues in the idea space blog. So that's one possibility, and definitely I would like to share the the results with a group, and that we follow up on this discussion, maybe on Facebook, and also on the Idea Space blog. So I think it's been a start, and well, I have a very good feeling actually after this meeting, because this idea sharing and open educational ideas concept does not seem to be that far from reality. So we received a lot of input regarding tools, regarding methods, regarding actions also on a policy level, which might be necessary. So, but it seems to be a realistic concept. And it would be very nice for me now to try out and discuss a couple of new ideas in whatever platform we use. So I'm very happy to see all this input, and the input was always very constructive, so that the general idea does not seem to be so bad. So now we just have to get things going and continue the discussion, hopefully on Facebook, and well, if there are more ideas how to continue, feel free to share, of course.
Yeah, thank you, Jan. I think something that can see already here taking place, that we have many participants here that are representing all kinds of networks of excellence and so on. I would really like to see what could we do together. So, for example, Nordic OER is this kind of a network for people in the Nordic countries interested in open educational resources, and to build on small collaborations there. And maybe we can take some of these open educational idea related activities there in focus. So are there anyone here maybe who aren't yet part of this Nordic OER network while living in the Nordic countries? I would at least firstly suggest to go to nordicoer.org and to see if you would like to be part of this. And maybe Ture, do you want to say something more about this? Have this intrigued something in your mind about Nordic OER activities that maybe could be built upon right on the spot? Okay, we don't seem to have the connection for Ture, but maybe I mean, there are lots of other types of activities also around in an international level, and within this document, I think it would be good. You don't have to do it right now, but all the participants, if you have some project, some kind of a thing that we can easily link these open educational ideas activities towards, feel free to post them here in this document, and we can see how do we build upon on those. You might want to do it in this document directly, but you can also do it in the Facebook page in the Open Educational Ideas group. I think that might be a good place to go forward. But I think we're soon coming into our session, and at this moment, I would like to ask: are there any comments from anyone? Anything that you would like to raise now in the end of the session? Okay, so thank you all for joining this session. I think this was a really good start to discuss the practices, the processes around open educational ideas, and just sharing practices in various contexts. I think this really helped us to understand a bit better how people share and what would they share in what kind of situations. But also, I think it really shows that there's a kind of a demand for something like this. As said by Ture, about Petri, and others as well, about digital scholars, the team workers, like team working skills and all of these things that are now actually in focus, is that this, and teachers, communities who are now in the last couple of years getting more and more active, that there seems to be a demand for something like this. But it's really now up to us and all of you here to that we really discuss and see how to make this kind of an idea sharing process in a very structured, in a simple manner. All of those people who might not have very high skills on ICT, that they know what to search for, they know what they can benefit from idea sharing, and make it somehow more collaborative, and really to increase the uptake of OER, because these are issues that have been a bit failing in some of the previous projects, even though the collaborative aspects are really the key about openness. So that's it for myself. If anyone else wants to just say any words here, please do so. But otherwise,
Yeah, well, also from my side, again, a big thank you. So we will really try to continue the discussion on as many channels as possible. So I think it might also be useful to use the mailing list of the Open Knowledge Foundation and the work group on open education. So let us just try to continue the discussion and take it up from here. Identify a couple of key topics and key suggestions and take it to the next step. And then I think in about 2 months from now, I would say we should try to gather all the input and have another online meeting to keep the discussion running.
perfect. That sounds very good.
Of, of, of course, we'll also invite to any other activity of the project. So if there are conference workshops, for example, the next time on the FQual Innovation Forum, which will happen in the beginning of May on Crete. So there are quite a lot of events, and I would be very happy to see many of the faces from today, and also, of course, your colleagues, to discuss more about the OEI concept and how to make it work. So that's all from my side. Has been very nice to talk to you.
And that sounds like a plan. Thanks all for joining, and if you didn't contact me yet by email, please send me a message so that I can share all of the presentation, also the links to the interactive documents, to the follow-ups for you then later on. So and thanks a lot for joining. It was really nice to spend these 2 hours with all of you. So that's all from our side. So let's then get back to the issues then offline. So thanks for coming, and see you. Bye bye.